Hello and welcome to episode 83 of PhotoKitchen. I am your humble host, MD Welch. And today we're not in the kitchen, we're outside, midday sun, trying to make a portrait. Now, this is less than ideal conditions when working with any sort of portraiture, but there are two different paths that you could take when trying to resolve this particular situation. As you can see right now, I have what is called a passive solution. There's no electricity involved, there's no flash, there's no strobe. We're just using diffusion and bounce. And that's gonna be our first setup here. Now, the pros of this solution are pretty straightforward. You're working with the sun, you have control over it with this big diffusion panel and also a big bounce panel here, and it gives you a lot of excellent light on your subject. But it also can be very prone to gusts of wind. If you see in the wide shot here, there are large sandbags on the legs of both of these C-stands, because if I don't do that, even the slightest amount of wind will take these things down and we'll have the America's Cup as all of this stuff is flying around. Even in a light breeze properly weighted down, these can be a liability. So while they can be affordable, they can also be a hazard, and you have to be careful with them. For my diffusion, I am using a 4x4 Matthews flag. A lot of different companies make something similar to this. This is about 3/4 of a stop of loss of light. But more importantly, it's creating a softness of light here that we're going to use on our model in a second. Just like any light source, the larger that it is and the closer that it is, the softer the light's going to be. Now, we may or may not need a bounce, but I've already set one up already. I have a 4x6 white bounce here by Chimera or Chimera, depending on how you want to pronounce it. This is just going to bring a little bit of light back into our subject. Without the bounce, we could get something that's very one-sided here, have a lot of shadow on one side, or just kind of creates one-dimensional looks. And if you have the ability to have diffusion and a bounce setup, it's just going to give you some better results. Also, this is pretty much the go-to setup for just about any swimwear shoot that you've ever seen in your life. Now, we're going to do this from the side, but you certainly could do this, have your model or your subject go into the diffusion like this, or even away and use the bounce coming back. So there's a lot of options here. We're just only going to do a side light for this particular video. We're going to be shooting on a 50mm lens. Now, another benefit of working with this natural light with diffusion and bounce is I don't have to worry about a flash to cycle or anything like that. I could also work at a very high shutter speed. So if the model needs to move, if they need to throw hair, if they need to emote to the camera, we're not waiting for a flash to cycle. So that's a huge benefit for your creativity and also with working with the model, especially an experienced model. So we brought our lovely model Grace out to set. And by set, we're talking about the driveway here. Budgets are limited in the PhotoKitchen. We have a 4x4 diffusion set up overhead, just like we did with the introduction. That's been changed and angled just a little bit, and we brought it in just a little bit closer to Grace to get a little bit more softness. It is like any light source. The closer I get that, the softer the light's going to be. We've also just adjusted this bounce a little bit more, so we have that a little bit closer as well. What we're going to do is take a series of images. We'll turn the diffusion away and the bounce away and shoot with available sunlight with no diffusion or no bounce. And you certainly could do that. But it is August, it is bright, it's about midday here in Nevada. It is super, super harsh light, and that's probably not the best result. So we'll bring the diffusion in next, we'll take a shot, and then we're going to go ahead and bring in that bounce and see what that looks like. So now that we've taken these three photos, we've had Grace duck back into the shade, get out of this hot, bright sun. And if you look at these three images, you could see a clear difference on each shot. The first shot with no diffusion, no bounce, it's harsh light, high contrast. Heck, Grace is probably having a hard time even keeping her eyes open. It's not pleasing light for anybody. When we add that diffusion, what you expect to have happen happens, right? That harshness goes away, that contrast goes away, and we have this beautiful, soft, even light source going across Grace's face. But the interesting thing is the bounce. When we add the bounce on that third shot, you have this beautiful rim of light that's coming into frame now that's adding a little bit more dimension and shape to Grace's face. This is something that a lot of people forget about when they're working with this kind of setup. The bounce is bringing light back into the frame and giving you direction and giving you shape and adding just a little bit more contrast. Now, you could go with silver, you could go with gold, you could go with soft gold or any of that kind of combination. I find that white is best because it's not so harsh on the eyes. But even this surface, which is kind of a shiny white, might be a little bit much. If you don't have the money, you could always go with like a piece of foam core. It has a nice matte finish to the white, and that might be a little bit easier on your model. But you could see with just a little bit of gear here that you could create some very pleasing light. Now, what are the cons to this setup? Well, as I mentioned before, you have to have a lot of sandbags to hold this stuff down. And these things are not cheap. Now, you could go with high-end companies like Matthews and Chimera for your solution, but there are other companies that offer more affordable solutions. But when you factor in C-stands, you're going to start to see your price tag increase. Now, also is the size and the setup time. This 4x4 is not easy to transport. I do have a 4x4 kit that you could kind of bolt together. That works out well, and this panel kit does also collapse. But those are even more money. So you are looking at a significant price tag. But the batteries never run out, and if you take care of it, it will last you a lifetime. And as you can see, it's great for video setups as well as photo setups. But what about flash? So we're now on to our second setup, and we've taken the diffusion and the bounce away, hence the harsh light that's hitting me right now. And we're substituting it with technology. We have a flash or strobe, an actual active light source rather than passive light sources here. Now, there's a lot of different ways to do both passive and active lighting. We're going to stick with something very simple for our active light source here. We're going to do one light source with our model backlit. So we have the sun hitting the back of the shoulders, and this is acting as a main or fill light. Now, as far as the light goes, you could use just about any flash or strobe that you want to, but there's going to be limitations. If you're doing a small speed light, you might not have enough power. If you're doing a traditional strobe or flash, you might not have enough technology because we don't have the most ideal background going on here. So I need to shoot at a very shallow depth of field. And to do that, I'm going to utilize high-speed sync. I'm at 1/8,000th of a second, f1.2 on the lens at ISO 100. The flash is almost at full power, so you're going to need a more powerful flash. So a new monolight battery operated that's high-speed sync compatible is the ideal solution here. And as far as setup goes, it's nothing fancy. Look at the shadow on the ground. That's where your sun is going. Put your light in the opposite side or maybe just off axis to that a little bit, and then get somebody as lovely as Grace to stand in front of your camera, and you're home free. So through the power of editing, we brought Grace onto set, again, a lovely driveway in suburbia, and we're gonna go ahead and make a few portraits. Now, the reason why high-speed sync is ideal here is not because we need it necessarily for Grace, but we need that shallow depth of field to kind of minimize suburbia in the background. If we had a more ideal space, that would be something that we could work with. But we're here and we have to make the best of it. And by the way, if you're thinking that this is not going to happen to you as a photographer, I have news for you. There will be many times somebody will say, hey, can we just jump outside and do some shots in a courtyard or maybe in a field someplace and there's less than ideal things in the background? High-speed sync could definitely save you. So we're going to go ahead and take one picture with the flash itself. And then just to make it easy, I'm going to pull the transmitter out and take another picture here. So as you can see between these two shots, we have a night and day difference. The fill flash is doing a great job on Grace. The 3-foot octa that I have installed here, it's a beautiful light source. It's really making soft light in harsh light conditions. That shallow depth of field, it's minimizing suburbia in the background. This is exactly what you expect from a good fill flash type of technique. Now, the downside of this though is the cost. This is not a cheap unit. These battery operated strobes that can do high speed sync, that have enough power to do this kind of work, are probably gonna set you back anywhere between $1,000 to $2,500, not to mention the modifiers. And of course, you're also going to need a stand. Now for the modifier itself, we are losing a bit of power in this 3-foot octa. We have an internal and external diffusion. In total, about 2.5 stops of light loss here. So if you do need to use a speed light, or maybe you have a couple of speed lights and you're trying to get this type of look, you could use a shoot-through umbrella that's going to have less power loss, or you could even do a silver umbrella and pick up some extra power by doing a silver bounce back into your subject. It won't be as soft as an octa, but it definitely can get the job done. So regardless if you're doing passive diffusion or passive bounce, or you're doing an active flash going on, you'd have a lot of options when we were working with crazy hard midday light. And you're going to generate something that you're absolutely going to like. Speaking of liking, I hope you liked this video. If so, please hit that like button. Please subscribe to the channel. And if you know anybody who's working in harsh light conditions like this, please share this video with them. And until next time, I'm MD Welch, wishing you all the best from a driveway outside of PhotoKitchen.